Back in the winding alleys of medieval villages, long before clocks ticked and electricity hummed, people believed the world was filled with signs, omens, and unseen forces. Their days were shaped by faith, fear, and the flicker of superstition. Take a second to gently tap that like button and subscribe. But only if this kind of calm storytelling is truly your thing. I'd really love to hear from you, so share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. It's always a peaceful little joy to see this sleepy space connect with people across the world. Now, switch off the lights, maybe let a fan whisper in the background. And let's begin tonight's slow journey together. You're just born in the medieval world, nestled in a cradle made of rough-hewn wood, the smell of fresh straw and damp earth filling your nostrils. As you grow, you learn to walk on paths that are a patchwork of mud and cobblestones, the sound of your small feet squishing and clicking with each step. The thatched roofs of the cottages tower over you, their edges frayed by years of wind and rain, like the worn hem of an old tunic. Your mother told you never to sweep after sunset. She'd sit you down by the crackling fire, the orange flames casting dancing shadows on the stone walls of your home. With a soft voice, she'd explain that the setting sun was when the spirits of the dead roam free, and sweeping then would stir up the dust, angering those spirits. The broom, a simple bundle of twigs tied together, would be carefully placed in the corner until the sun peeked over the horizon once more. You watched as she did this each day, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she was performing a sacred ritual. The old man at the end of the lane believed his bread must rise under moonlight. You'd see him on clear nights, his weathered face turned towards the sky, a large wooden bowl filled with dough sitting on his doorstep. The silver glow of the moon bathed the dough, and he'd murmur words you couldn't quite understand, his breath forming small clouds in the cool night air. He said the moon's magic made the bread lighter, fluffier, and that sharing a piece of this moon, risen bread with a neighbor, would bring good fortune to both families. You remember how no one whistled after dark. The village would fall into a hushed silence as the sun dipped below the horizon. The only sounds were the occasional hoot of an owl and the soft rustling of leaves. One evening, as a child, you absent-mindedly whistled a tune as you played near your cottage. Your grandmother rushed out, her face pale with worry. She quickly covered your mouth with her wrinkled hand and pulled you inside. "Whistling calls the demon," she whispered, her eyes wide. They followed the sound, looking for lost souls to claim. From that day on, the thought of whistling in the dark sent a shiver down your spine. When you helped your father in the fields, he'd always stop and take a moment to bow his head when passing an old gnarled tree. This tree, with its branches reaching out like twisted fingers, was said to be the home of forest spirits. Your father believed that showing respect would ensure a good harvest. He'd mutter a quiet prayer, his rough hands clasped together, and then continue on his way, his steps a bit lighter, as if he carried the approval of those unseen guardians. The women in the village would never cut their hair during a full moon. They'd gather in small groups, sitting on benches outside their cottages, chatting in hushed tones as they worked on their embroidery. You'd see them running their fingers through their long locks, a look of reverence on their faces. They said the full moon had a powerful energy, and cutting hair then would bring bad luck, perhaps even causing illness or misfortune to befall their families. Instead, they'd wait for the moon to wane, when its power was said to weaken, and only then would they carefully trim the ends of their hair. As you grew older, you noticed that the blacksmith always carried a small horseshoe with him. He'd hang it above the entrance to his forge, its curved shape glinting in the firelight. He believed that the horseshoe, with its connection to the noble horse, had protective powers. It would ward off evil spirits from his forge, ensuring that the metal he worked with was pure and that his creations were strong and true. And when a new horse was brought to the village, the blacksmith would be the first to put a new horseshoe on its hoof, muttering blessings all the while. When you went to the market with your mother, she would always avoid walking under ladders. The sight of a ladder propped up against a building made her grip your hand tightly and steer you around it. She said that a ladder leaning against a wall formed a triangle, and triangles were sacred to the devil. Walking under one would break the triangle's spell, inviting his wrath and bringing misfortune upon you. You watched as other villagers did the same, some even crossing themselves as they gave the ladders a wide berth, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and respect for this unspoken rule. In the evenings, as the family sat around the table for dinner, your grandfather would tell stories of the sea. He had once been a fisherman, and he said that if a fisherman saw a single seagull flying over the water, it was a sign of bad luck. But if there were 2 seagulls, it meant a bountiful catch was on its way. He described the seagull's cries, a mournful sound that seemed to carry the secrets of the ocean. When he spoke of the superstition, his voice would grow soft, as if he was sharing a precious secret. You could almost smell the salt in the air and feel the rocking of the boat as he told tales of storms at sea, and how the seagull's presence could foretell the weather. The village healer, an old woman with a kind face and wise eyes, believed that certain plants had magical properties. She would go out into the fields and forests at dawn when the dew was still on the grass to gather herbs. She said that picking St. John's wort on Midsummer's Eve would give it special powers to ward off evil. You watched as she carefully dried the herbs in her cottage, hanging them from the rafters. The air was filled with the earthy scent of the plants, and she would hum softly as she worked, a tune that seemed to blend with the crackling of the fire and the gentle breeze outside. When a baby was born in the village, the midwife would place a piece of iron under the mother's bed. Iron was considered a powerful metal, one that could repel evil spirits. She believed that the spirits were jealous of new life and would try to harm the baby or the mother. The cold touch of the iron, she said, would keep them at bay. You remembered the first time you saw this, the midwife's gentle hands placing the small piece of iron, and the look of relief on the mother's face as she knew her child was a bit safer. As you walked through the village at night, you noticed that the windows of the houses were covered with thick curtains. The villagers believed that leaving the windows open at night would allow evil spirits to enter. The curtains, made of heavy fabric, blocked out the darkness and any unwanted visitors. You could hear the soft murmur of voices from inside the houses, a comforting sound in the otherwise quiet night. And every now and then, a candle would flicker behind the curtains, casting a warm glow that seemed to hold the darkness at bay. The old miller at the edge of the village had a strange belief about his millstones. He said that if the millstones were not properly respected, they would stop working. Before each grinding, he would sprinkle a bit of salt around the base of the millstones, muttering words of gratitude. The salt, he believed, purified the stones and kept them happy. You could hear the rhythmic creaking of the mill as it ground the grain, a sound that was as much a part of the village as the church bells. And every time you passed the mill, you would see the small pile of salt, a silent testament to the miller's faith in his superstition. When you passed by the local graveyard, you were always told to hold your breath. The air around the gravestone seemed to hang heavy, and the moss-covered stones stood like silent sentinels. Your father said that breathing in the air of the graveyard would invite the spirits of the dead into your body. They might latch onto your soul, following you home and causing all manner of trouble. So you'd clamp your lips shut, your eyes darting nervously between the weathered headstones as you quickened your pace, only daring to take a breath once you were well past the creaking iron gates. In the winter months, when the snow blanketed the village, the children were forbidden from eating icicles. The elders said that icicles were the frozen tears of sad spirits, and consuming them would bring sorrow and illness. You'd watch the icicles dangle from the eaves, their clear, pointed forms glistening in the weak winter sun. The temptation to taste their cold, sweet, seeming surface was strong, but the fear of the consequences kept your hands firmly at your sides. Instead, you'd make snowballs and build small forts, careful not to let any part of the icy formations touch your lips. The village carpenter had a peculiar ritual before starting any new project. He would always knock 3 times on the piece of wood he intended to use. He believed that trees had spirits within them, and by knocking, he was asking permission to transform the wood into something new. He'd mutter a few words too, words that sounded ancient and foreign, as if they came from a time long past. You'd watch him work, his chisel carving away at the wood with slow, deliberate strokes, and you couldn't help but wonder if the spirit of the tree was watching over him, guiding his hands. When a rainbow appeared in the sky, the villagers would stop whatever they were doing and point at it with their index fingers. They said that pointing at a rainbow with any other finger would bring bad luck, but using the index finger somehow honored the beauty and mystery of the phenomenon. You'd stand there, your finger extended, marveling at the arc of colors stretching across the sky. Some of the older villagers would even recite a small prayer, thanking the heavens for the sight and hoping that it was a sign of good things to come. The women who did the village laundry had a superstition about the full moon. They would never hang their clothes out to dry during a full moon. They said that the moon's light was too powerful, and it would bleach the colors from the fabrics and make the clothes brittle. Instead, they'd wait for a cloudy day or a time when the moon was just a sliver in the sky. You'd see them huddled together by the river, their hands busy scrubbing the clothes against the smooth stones, chatting in low voices about the best way to keep the colors bright and the fabric soft. As you walked along the forest paths, you were taught to avoid stepping on any mushrooms that grew in a perfect circle. These were known as fairy rings, and it was said that fairies danced in these circles at night. Stepping inside one would anger the fairies, and they might curse you or lead you astray in the forest. You'd look at the rings of mushrooms with a mixture of awe and fear, imagining the tiny fairies twirling and spinning under the light of the moon, their laughter echoing through the trees. And you'd make sure to give the fairy rings a wide berth just in case. When it came time to harvest the apples from the village orchard, the farmers would always leave the first and the last fruits on the trees. They believed these apples were offerings to the spirits of the land, the unseen guardians who watched over the crops. The first apple was a token of gratitude for the bountiful growth, while the last was a promise that the cycle would continue in the coming year. You'd see the red and green apples hanging alone, their colors standing out against the otherwise bare branches like jewels left behind for the spirits to claim. In the evenings, as the sun began to set and the sky turned a deep shade of purple, the villagers would close all the doors and windows of their homes. They said that the setting sun was a time when evil spirits were at their most powerful, and leaving an opening would be an invitation for them to enter. The sound of wooden doors creaking shut and shutters being latched echoed through the village, creating a sense of safety and enclosure. You'd sit by the fire, feeling the warmth on your face, knowing that the barriers between you and the outside world were firmly in place. The local shepherd had a special whistle that he used to call his sheep, but he would never use this whistle to call a person. He believed that the sound was a language meant only for the animals, and using it on a human would disrupt the natural order. When he needed to get the attention of another villager, he'd use a simple shout or a wave. You'd watch him in the fields, his whistle creating a sweet, clear note that carried on the wind, and the sheep would come running, their woolly forms bobbing as they followed his command. When a child lost a tooth, the parents would have a specific ritual. They'd take the tooth and throw it onto the roof of the house while saying a little rhyme. They believed that this would ensure that a new, healthy tooth would grow in its place. The rhyme was passed down from generation to generation, and each family had their own version. You remember the first time you lost a tooth, the excitement and the slight pain, and the way your mother carefully placed the tiny tooth in her palm before sending it up to the roof, her voice soft as she recited the words. The villagers who worked in the mines had a superstition about whistling underground. They said that whistling would anger the spirits of the earth and could cause cave-ins or other disasters. Instead, they would sing soft, mournful songs as they worked, the sound of their voices echoing through the dark tunnels. The songs were a way to soothe the spirits and to keep themselves calm in the confined, dangerous space. You could almost picture them, their pickaxes in hand, their faces smeared with dirt, their voices rising and falling in the darkness. When a traveler passed through the village, the villagers would offer them a bit of bread and salt, but they would never offer them water from a well. They believed that water from a well was sacred, and giving it to a stranger might anger the well, spirits. Instead, they'd offer water that had been boiled and cooled, or water from a rain barrel. The act of sharing bread and salt was a sign of hospitality, but also a way to ensure that the stranger brought no ill fortune with them. You'd watch as the travelers accepted the offerings, their faces grateful, and you'd wonder what stories they carried with them from far off lands. As the days grew shorter and the nights longer, the villagers would often gather around the communal oven to bake their bread. Before placing the dough inside, an elderly woman would sprinkle a handful of poppy seeds on the floor of the oven. She whispered that poppy seeds were a favorite of the hearth spirits, and offering them would ensure that the bread baked evenly and rose high. The seeds crackled softly as they caught the heat, their nutty aroma mingling with the scent of the rising dough. Everyone waited patiently, their eyes fixed on the oven door, hoping for a sign of the spirit's favor. When a new house was being built, the builders would always place a piece of blue glass in the cornerstone. Blue was considered a protective color, capable of warding off the evil eye and other malevolent forces. They believed that this small piece of glass would act as a silent sentinel, watching over the home and its future inhabitants for generations to come. As the stone was carefully lowered into place, the workers would mutter prayers and blessings, their rough hands gently smoothing the mortar around it. In the village school, the children were taught to write with quill pens made from the feathers of certain birds. But they were strictly forbidden from using the feathers of owls. Owls were seen as harbingers of death and misfortune, and having an owl's feather in the classroom was thought to cast a shadow over the students' learning. Instead, they used the feathers of pigeons or chickens, which were believed to bring clarity and good luck to their studies. You could hear the soft scratch of the quills on parchment as the children copied out their lessons, their tongues poking out of the corners of their mouths in concentration. When a villager fell ill, the neighbors would bring over small bundles of thyme. Thyme was not only thought to have healing properties, but also to repel the evil spirits that were believed to cause the illness. The sick person's room would be filled with the pungent, earthy smell of the herb, hanging in bunches from the bedposts and windows. Family members would sit by the bedside, crushing the thyme leaves between their fingers and sprinkling the resulting powder around the room, all the while whispering prayers for a swift recovery. During thunderstorms, the villagers would place their iron tools and utensils in the center of the room. Iron was known to have the power to deflect lightning, which they believed was the angry wrath of the gods or the work of evil spirits. The sight of all the iron objects glinting in the dim light of the candles gave a sense of security, as if the metal was forming a protective barrier against the storm outside. You could hear the thunder rumbling in the distance, the sound vibrating through the walls of the cottage. But the iron in the room seemed to offer a small comfort in the face of the tempest. When a young couple was courting, the girl's mother would secretly check the shape of the wax from the candles they used during their meetings. If the wax dripped evenly and formed smooth, rounded shapes, it was a sign of a happy and prosperous marriage. But if the wax formed jagged, uneven blobs, it was seen as an omen of future strife. The mother would watch the candles with a keen eye, her heart filled with hope and anxiety as she interpreted the patterns of the melting wax. When the villagers went out to hunt, they would never mention the word wolf directly. Instead, they referred to it as the Gray One, or the forest shadow. They believed that speaking the name of the wolf would summon the creature, angering it and putting the hunters in great danger. Before setting out, each hunter would tie a sprig of rosemary to their belt. Rosemary was thought to enhance their senses and keep evil spirits, which might try to lead them astray in the forest, at bay. As they walked through the dense underbrush, the only sounds were the soft crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional hush as one hunter signaled to another with a raised hand. In the village square, there was an ancient oak tree. The villagers would often leave small offerings of milk or bread at its base. They said that the tree was home to a powerful spirit, a guardian of the village. If someone needed help or guidance, they would sit under the tree's sprawling branches, whispering their wishes into the wind. It was believed that the spirit within the oak would listen, and if it deemed the request worthy, would send signs or dreams to answer. On windy days, the leaves of the oak would rustle in a way that sounded almost like the spirit was speaking, a soft murmur that carried across the square. When a woman was expecting a child, she would avoid looking at deformed animals. The villagers feared that doing so would cause the baby to be born with similar imperfections. Instead, she would seek out beautiful things to gaze upon, a blooming rose in the garden, a clear blue sky, or the smiling face of a healthy child. Her friends and family would also bring her images of perfection, like hand, drawn pictures of idealized babies, or carved wooden figurines of strong, healthy children. They would sit with her by the fire, sharing stories of happy births and offering words of comfort and hope. The local potter had a unique belief about his kiln. He would always leave a small opening at the top, even when firing the most delicate pieces. He said that this allowed the spirits of the clay to escape. If the spirits were trapped inside, they would become angry and cause the pottery to crack or shatter during the firing process. As the kiln heated up, he would stand nearby, watching the smoke curl out of the opening, imagining the spirits ascending into the sky, free to find new pieces of clay to inhabit. The glow of the fire would cast his shadow on the wall, making it seem as if he was a part of the ancient ritual taking place. When the villagers washed their clothes in the river, they would always start with the dirtiest garments first. They believed that if they began with the cleanest clothes, the dirt from the remaining items would taint them, and they never wrung out the clothes while still in the water. This was seen as disrespectful to the river spirit, who provided the water for washing. Instead, they would carefully lift the wet clothes out, letting the excess water drip back into the river before gently squeezing them on the bank. The sound of the water splashing back into the river and the rhythmic ringing of the fabric became a familiar melody in the village. As the sun set and the stars began to appear, the children were told to count the stars in the sky. But they were warned not to count past a certain number, usually 13. It was said that if they counted too many stars, they would catch the attention of the star spirits, who might steal their eyesight or carry them away into the night sky. So the children would lie on their backs in the grass, their eyes wide as they slowly counted the twinkling lights above, stopping just short of that forbidden number, their hearts pounding with a mixture of excitement and fear. When a villager passed by a crossroads at night, they would always take a small detour around the very center of the intersection. Crossroads were considered liminal spaces where the boundaries between different worlds blurred, and evil spirits lurked, waiting to mislead those who dared to walk through the middle. Some would sprinkle a bit of salt as they made their way around, believing the sharp crystals would form a protective path. The sound of their boots crunching on the gravel as they veered off, course echoed in the stillness, a soft symphony of caution. In the kitchens, the cook would never stir a pot in a figure-8 motion. This was said to mimic the infinity symbol, and the devil was thought to be drawn to such patterns, perhaps seeing it as an invitation to meddle with the food. Instead, they would stir in a slow, circular motion, always in the same direction, clockwise if possible. As the wooden spoon scraped the bottom of the pot, releasing the aroma of simmering stew or boiling porridge, the cook would mutter quiet blessings, their words blending with the gentle bubbling of the liquid. When a new book was brought into the village, the priest would hold a special ceremony. He would sprinkle holy water on the pages, believing that this would ward off any evil spells or false teachings that might be hidden within. The villagers would gather around, watching in reverence as the droplets landed on the vellum, their eyes fixed on the ancient text. They thought that by sanctifying the book in this way, the words would carry more weight, and the knowledge contained within would be pure and true. During the winter, when ice formed on the ponds, the children were forbidden from skating on the ice until an adult had first thrown a stone across its surface. It was believed that the ice was a living thing, and if it wasn't properly greeted, it might crack and swallow the skaters whole. The sound of the stone skimming across the ice, followed by a tense moment of waiting to see if the ice held, was a familiar prelude to hours of frosty fun. If the stone made it safely to the other side, the children would cheer, knowing that the ice spirit had given its permission. The villagers who kept bees had a strange superstition. They would always tell the bees whenever there was a major event in the family, such as a birth, a marriage, or a death. They believed that the bees were part of the family, and that failing to inform them would make the bees angry, causing them to stop producing honey or even abandon their hives. So, with a soft voice, they would lean close to the hives, whispering the news as if sharing a secret with an old friend, and the gentle hum of the bees seemed to be their response. When a villager saw a spider spinning its web in the morning, they took it as a sign of good luck. But if they saw a spider web at night, they would carefully destroy it. Night spun webs were thought to be traps set by evil spirits designed to catch the unwary and ensnare their souls. Using a stick or a broom, they would break apart the delicate filaments, watching as the web disintegrated, and then mutter a quick prayer of thanks for avoiding the potential danger. When a traveler came across a hedgehog on the road, they would stop and bow their head in respect. Hedgehogs were seen as messengers of the forest spirits, and showing deference was believed to ensure a safe journey. The traveler would watch the small creature waddle along, its spines glinting in the sunlight, before continuing on their way, feeling a sense of peace, knowing they had honored the natural order. In the village dye works, the dyers had a particular superstition about using the color purple. Purple was a rare and expensive dye, made from the shells of certain sea creatures. Before starting a batch, they would light a small candle made from beeswax and say a prayer to the sea gods, asking for their blessing. They believed that without this ritual, the color would fade quickly or turn an unpleasant shade, wasting the precious materials. The soft glow of the candle illuminated the vats of dye, casting an otherworldly light on the dyers' faces as they carefully stirred the liquid. When a child learned to walk, the parents would scatter small pebbles in the 4 directions outside their home. They thought that this would prevent evil spirits from tripping up the child as they explored the world. Each pebble was placed with care, and the parents would murmur words of protection, imagining a barrier of stones keeping their little ones safe. The sound of the pebbles hitting the ground was like a gentle percussion, marking a new chapter in the child's life. The villagers who worked in the flax fields had a strange belief about singing. They would only sing happy songs while harvesting the flax, believing that sad or mournful tunes would taint the fibers. As they walked through the fields, their voices would rise up, a chorus of joyous melodies that filled the air. The flax plants seemed to sway in time with the music, as if they too were partaking in the celebration of the harvest. When a new well was dug, the diggers would place a silver coin at the bottom before filling it with water. Silver was considered a pure and powerful metal, and they believed that the coin would purify the water and keep it free from evil spirits. The sight of the coin glinting in the darkness at the bottom of the well was a reassuring one, and the villagers would often gather around to watch as the first bucket of water was drawn up, feeling a sense of relief knowing that their new source of water was protected. As the moon waxed and waned, the village herbalist would gather different plants at specific phases. She said that herbs picked during a full moon had the most potent healing properties, while those gathered during a new moon were better for protection spells. With a wicker basket on her arm, she would wander through the meadows and forests, her eyes trained on the sky and the plants beneath her feet. The soft rustling of the leaves as she picked the herbs was a soothing sound, like the whispers of the plants themselves sharing their secrets. When the village cart was loaded with goods for the market, the driver would always place a horseshoe upside, down on top of the pile. He believed that this would catch good luck along the journey, ensuring that the trip was safe and that all the goods would sell well. As the cart rumbled along the bumpy dirt road, the horseshoe would clink softly against the other items, a gentle reminder of the protection it was supposed to offer. The driver would hum a quiet tune, his eyes on the path ahead, watching for any signs of trouble, but also keeping an eye out for the lucky omens that the horseshoe was meant to attract. In the evenings, when the villagers gathered around the communal fire, they would take turns telling stories. But before starting, each storyteller would spit 3 times over their left shoulder. This was to ward off any evil spirits that might try to distort the truth or bring bad luck to the tale. The spitting was done quickly and quietly, almost as a reflex, and then the storyteller would clear their throat and begin, their voice low and melodious, carrying the listeners away to far, off lands and times. The crackling of the fire and the soft sighs of the audience would blend with the words of the story, creating a hypnotic atmosphere. When a woman was weaving a tapestry, she would never cut the final thread with a dull blade. A sharp knife was used instead, as it was thought that a dull blade would snag the good fortune that the tapestry was meant to bring. The act of cutting the thread was done with great care, as if it was the final touch on a sacred ritual. The tapestry, with its intricate patterns and vibrant colors, would then be hung on the wall of the home, not just as a decoration, but as a shield against evil, its threads woven with the hopes and prayers of the weaver. The villagers who fished in the nearby lake had a superstition about the first catch of the day. They would always throw the smallest fish back into the water, saying a few words of gratitude as they did so. They believed that this was a way of paying respect to the lake spirits, ensuring that there would always be fish in the waters. The sight of the small fish swimming away, its scales glistening in the sunlight, was a sign of good things to come. And then, with renewed hope, the fishermen would cast their nets again, waiting patiently for the next catch. When a child had a nightmare, the mother would take a bowl of salt and place it under the child's bed. Salt was known for its purifying properties, and it was thought that it would absorb the bad dreams, keeping the child safe through the night. The mother would also whisper a soft lullaby, her voice gentle and soothing as she stroked the child's hair. The next morning, when the child woke up feeling refreshed, the mother would take the bowl of salt and scatter it outside, believing that she was casting away the remnants of the nightmare. As the seasons changed, the villagers would perform a small ritual to mark the transition. At the onset of spring, they would plant a sprig of mint at the entrance of their homes. Mint was associated with new beginnings and growth, and they believed that it would invite the blessings of the spring spirits. The fresh scent of the mint would fill the air, a welcome change after the cold, damp winter. And as the days grew warmer, the villagers would watch as the mint plant grew, taking it as a sign that the new season was off to a good start. When passing by an abandoned cottage, the villagers would always turn their heads away and mutter a quick prayer. These forsaken dwellings were thought to be haunted by the spirits of those who had once lived there, spirits that lingered in anger or sorrow. Some said that if you looked directly at an abandoned cottage, the spirits might see your gaze as an invitation and follow you home. The wind would often whistle through the broken windows, creating an eerie moan that seemed to confirm the presence of these restless souls. So, with eyes cast down, or towards the opposite direction, the villagers would hurry past, their steps quickening until the cottage was out of sight. In the stables, the grooms would never tie a horse's reins in a knot. Knots were considered a bad omen as they were thought to entangle the horse's luck and spirit. Instead, they would use special hitches and loops that could be easily undone. Each time a groom led a horse out of the stable, he would pat its flank gently and whisper words of encouragement, believing that a positive interaction would ensure a smooth ride. The soft neighing of the horses and the jingle of the bridles filled the air, creating a peaceful rhythm in the early morning as the riders prepared for their day. When baking bread, the village women would sometimes place a small piece of charcoal in the dough. Charcoal was believed to have cleansing properties, and it was thought that it would absorb any impurities or evil influences in the bread. As the bread baked in the oven, the women would watch closely, their noses twitching at the delicious aroma. When the bread was finally done, they would carefully remove the piece of charcoal, as if it had served its purpose in protecting the loaf. The golden, brown crust and the soft, warm interior of the bread were a welcome sight at the dinner table, a symbol of sustenance and safety. The children in the village were taught to never pick flowers from a grave. Flowers on a grave were seen as offerings to the dead, and taking them was considered extremely disrespectful. It was said that the spirits of the departed would be angered and might bring misfortune to the person who dared to steal their flowers. So when the children played in the meadows near the graveyard, they would admire the beautiful blooms from a distance, their eyes filled with wonder, but their hands firmly at their sides. When a villager saw a single magpie, they would immediately bow and say, "Good morning, Mr. Magpie. How is your lady wife?" This was to appease the magpie, as it was believed that a single magpie was a sign of bad luck. But by showing respect and acknowledging the magpie's supposed mate, the villager hoped to avoid any misfortune. The magpie, with its glossy black and white feathers, would often cock its head and stare back, as if listening to the greeting. And then, with a flap of its wings, it would fly away, leaving the villager to breathe a sigh of relief. As the sun began to set, the villagers would close all the books in their homes. Books were seen as containers of knowledge and wisdom, and it was thought that leaving them open at night would allow evil spirits to enter and corrupt the words within. Each book was carefully shut, its pages smoothed down, and placed on a shelf or table. The soft thud of the book's closing could be heard in cottages throughout the village, a gentle routine that marked the end of the day's learning and the beginning of the night's rest. When milking the cows, the dairy maids would always start with the cow on the left-hand side of the barn. They believed that the left side was closest to the heart, and beginning there would ensure a bountiful yield of rich, creamy milk. As they sat on their low stools, their hands rhythmically squeezing the teats, they would hum a soft, wordless tune. The sound of the milk hitting the metal pail was like a gentle rain, and every now and then they would pause to whisper kind words to the cow, like, "Good girl, give us a good share today." Some even believed that if a cow swished its tail 3 times while being milked, it was a sign that the butter made from that milk would be especially sweet. In the cobbler's shop, the craftsman would never start a new pair of shoes on a Friday. Fridays were considered an unlucky day, associated with the crucifixion of Christ. Instead, he would spend the day sharpening his tools, sorting his leather scraps, and planning the next week's work. When he finally began a new pair on a different day, he would make the first cut with a special knife that had been blessed by the priest. He would hold the leather up to the light, studying its grain, and then mutter a short prayer for the shoes to be sturdy and comfortable for the wearer. The smell of fresh, cut leather and the sound of his hammer tapping against the anvil filled the small shop, creating a cozy, almost hypnotic atmosphere. When a villager was building a fence, they would always place a small piece of red cloth at each corner post. Red was a powerful color, believed to ward off evil spirits and keep wild animals away. As they hammered the post into the ground, they would chant a simple rhyme passed down through generations. The fence would slowly take shape, its wooden slats standing upright like silent guards around the property. And when the wind blew, the red cloths would flutter like little flags of protection waving in the breeze. The village children were taught to never step on an ant hill. Ants were seen as hard, working creatures, and disturbing their homes was considered a great sin. It was said that the ants would then seek revenge, perhaps by crawling into the offender's bed at night or causing their crops to wither. So whenever the children played near an ant hill, they would watch in fascination as the tiny insects scurried back and forth, carrying bits of leaves and food. They would even leave small crumbs nearby as an offering, hoping to stay on the ants' good side. When a traveler reached the outskirts of the village, they would look for a particular tree with a large knot in its trunk. This tree was a marker, and if they circled it 3 times clockwise, they believed it would ensure a warm welcome from the villagers. The rough bark of the tree would scrape against their hands as they made their way around, and they would mutter words of hope under their breath. After the ritual, they would straighten their clothes and walk into the village with a sense of confidence, ready to share their stories and perhaps find a place to rest for the night. As the stars began to twinkle in the evening sky, the villagers would gather in small groups to identify the constellations. But they were always careful not to point directly at the North Star. The North Star was seen as a sacred guide, and pointing at it was considered disrespectful. Instead, they would use their whole hand or a stick to indicate its general direction. They would tell stories about the gods and heroes associated with the stars, their voices soft and filled with awe as they looked up at the vast expanse of the night sky. When passing a blacksmith's forge after dark, villagers would wrap their cloaks tighter and quicken their steps. The glowing coals were thought to attract wandering spirits who might latch onto the heat and follow anyone who lingered. Some even believed that the sparks flying from the anvil were tiny fragments of evil, so they'd lower their heads and mutter a prayer for safe passage. The rhythmic clanging of hammer on metal echoed in the quiet night, but it was a comforting sound, proof that the smith still worked and that his fires kept the worst spirits at bay. In the herbalist's cottage, dried lavender hung from every rafter. She said its scent could chase away the blue devils, moods of sadness that were believed to be caused by invisible creatures nesting in dark corners. When a villager felt low, she'd grind lavender buds into a pouch and tie it around their neck. Wear it close, she'd say, and the devils will sneeze themselves right out of your heart. The soft purple flowers would brush against the wearer's chest, releasing a gentle fragrance with each breath, like a lullaby for the soul. Children were taught to never cross a bridge without spitting over the side 3 times. Bridges were seen as thresholds between worlds, and spitting was a way to mark the passage, letting the river spirits know you meant no harm. Some kids would make a game of it, trying to hit a floating leaf or a stone in the water, but their parents would scold them for being too playful. It's not a jest, they'd warn. The river remembers who shows respect. The sound of a soft tui would drift over the water, followed by the quick patter of feet as the child ran to catch up. When sewing a shirt for a loved one, a woman would always leave 1 stitch undone until the final fitting. She believed that a perfectly finished garment might trap the wearer's spirit, so the loose thread was a gateway for luck to enter. As she held the shirt up to the light, she'd run her finger over the incomplete seam, murmuring a wish for the wearer's health. The loose thread would dangle gently, like a tiny anchor holding the garment to the world of the living. Farmers never plowed their fields on the day of a new moon. The moon's absence was thought to make the soil sleepy, and turning it then would anger the earth spirits. Instead, they'd spend the day mending tools or resting by the fire, watching the sky for the first sliver of moonlight. When the new moon finally appeared, they'd go out to the fields and place a handful of grain in the furrows, thanking the earth for its patience. The grain would disappear overnight, either eaten by birds or sunk into the soil, but the farmers took it as a sign that the spirits had accepted their offering. As the first frost settled on the village, the milkmaids would pour a little cream into the snow outside their doors. They said the frost fairies loved cream, and leaving a gift would ensure that the frost didn't damage their cows' udders. The cream would freeze into a tiny, shimmering puddle, and in the morning, the maids would look for tiny footprints around it, proof that the fairies had come. Sometimes they'd see a faint trail of sparkles leading into the woods, and they'd smile, knowing the cows would stay warm through the cold. When a villager found a 4-leaf clover, they would immediately tuck it into their cap and keep silent until sunset. Speaking of the lucky find was thought to scare the luck away, so they'd walk with a secret smile, feeling the soft clover leaf pressed against their head. Some even believed the clover could make them invisible to evil spirits, so they'd take quiet detours through the forest, listening for the rustle of unseen things that might pass right by. In the weaver's cottage, a small bell hung from the loom. She rang it 3 times before starting a new weave, saying it woke the thread spirits that helped the patterns form. The bell's tone was high and clear, like a bird's call, and as she passed the shuttle back and forth, she'd sometimes pause to listen for the spirit's answer in the hum of the loom. The fabric would take shape slowly, threads interlacing like a spell, and the bell would sway gently in the breeze, a constant reminder of the unseen helpers. Children were forbidden from picking apples after the first frost. The frost was said to coat the fruit with fairy tears, and eating them would make a child cry for a month. Instead, they'd watch the apples hang heavy on branches, their red skins glistening with ice, and imagine the fairies gathering under the tree to mourn their lost tears. Some kids would leave bits of bread near the trunk as an apology, though they never saw the fairies take them, only found the crumbs gone by morning, replaced by a single frost-covered feather. When a traveler carried a purse of coins, they'd always put a piece of dry bread inside. Bread was seen as a symbol of life, and they believed it would feed the coins, keeping them from disappearing or turning to stone. The bread would grow hard and dusty, but the traveler would touch it before each purchase, muttering, "Bread for life, coins for need." Sometimes, after a long journey, they'd find the bread had crumbled into a fine powder, which they'd sprinkle on the ground as a thank you to the road spirits. In the village school, the master kept a bowl of salt on his desk. If a student misbehaved, he'd have them stand next to the bowl and smell the salt, believing its sharpness would wake the brain and chase away lazy spirits. The students would wrinkle their noses at the strong scent, but some secretly thought the salt also kept the master's temper in check. The bowl was always full, replenished every morning with a pinch from the communal salt barrel, its grains as white and pure as the snow outside. As the winter solstice approached, villagers would place a candle in each window, but only after checking that the wick was perfectly straight. A crooked wick was an omen of bad luck, so they'd trim it with tiny scissors, humming a soft tune to bless the flame. The candles would flicker in the windows all night, their light forming a chain through the village, and people would say the straight wicks guided lost souls back to the afterlife, keeping them from wandering the cold streets. When milking a cow, the maid would sometimes see a bubble form on the surface of the milk. She'd never burst it, for bubbles were thought to be the breath of forest spirits who'd come to watch. Instead, she'd cover the pail gently and leave it outside for an hour, letting the spirits drink their fill. When she returned, the bubble would be gone, and the milk would seem sweeter, as if the spirits had left a gift in return for the kindness. In the blacksmith's forge, a horseshoe hung above the door, but it was always placed with the ends pointing up, like a cup to catch good luck. If someone accidentally knocked it askew, they'd rush to fix it, muttering, "Don't spill the luck." The horseshoe would heat and cool with the forge's fires, its metal darkening over time. But it never lost its shape, a silent guardian against the sparks and shadows that filled the shop. Children who had trouble sleeping were given a pouch of roasted acorns to keep under their pillows. The acorn's earthy smell was said to lull the mind, and their round shape reminded the brain to roll into sleep. The pouch would grow warm from the child's body heat, releasing a gentle aroma that mixed with the straw of the mattress, creating a nest of comfort that even the most restless dreams couldn't disturb. As the first spring flowers bloomed, villagers would pick a daisy and make a chain, but only if the flower had an even number of petals. Odd numbers were considered unlucky, so they'd count carefully, plucking each petal with a whisper, 1 for joy, 2 for sorrow, until they found a perfect daisy. The chains would be worn around the neck or tied to a wrist, their white and yellow petals a promise that the new season would bring more joy than sorrow. When a villager saw a rainbow, they would run to the nearest stream and throw in a pebble, making a wish as it splashed. Rainbows were bridges between heaven and earth, and the pebble was a way to send the wish across. Some would close their eyes and imagine the wish riding the rainbow's colors, while others would watch the pebble sink, believing the stream carried it to the rainbow's end, where all wishes came true. In the herbalist's garden, a patch of rue grew by the gate. She'd rub a leaf between her fingers before tending to a sick patient, saying the bitter scent kept illness spirits from clinging to her hands. The rue's leaves were blue, green, and slightly sticky, and as she moved through the garden, the scent would trail behind her, like a thin veil of protection against the invisible things that caused harm. Children were taught to never blow out a candle. Instead, they'd pinch the wick between their fingers. Blowing was thought to spread the candle's spirit too far, possibly letting it carry bad dreams to other rooms. The hiss of the pinched wick was a quiet sound, and the child would quickly suck their finger to cool it, feeling a small sense of pride in doing the task properly. As the moon rose full, the village midwife would place a bowl of water outside her door. The moonlight would fill the bowl, and she believed this moon water had healing properties for newborns. When a baby cried, she'd dip a cloth in the water and wipe their forehead, murmuring, "Moon calm, moon bright, chase the tears from this night." The water would feel cool and smooth, like liquid silver, and the baby's cries would often fade, lulled by the moon's gentle magic. When a traveler crossed a river, they would wet their fingers and touch their forehead, lips, and heart. This was to honor the river spirit, letting it know they meant no harm. The water would feel cold against the skin, and the traveler would pause for a moment, listening to the river's flow before continuing on, feeling a bit lighter, as if the spirit had given a silent blessing. When a villager sharpened a knife, they would always start from the handle and move towards the tip, never the other way. This was believed to guide the blade's spirit toward protection rather than letting it turn inward and cause harm. The stone would grind against the metal with a steady, scraping sound, and the villager would occasionally spit on the blade, claiming the saliva washed away any evil the steel might have picked up. When finished, they'd hold the knife up to the light, checking for a clear reflection as a sign that the spirit was content. In the village apiary, beekeepers would never wear black near the hives. Black was thought to anger the bees, who associated the color with storm clouds and danger. Instead, they'd don white linen smocks, saying the bright color pleased the bees and made them gentle. As they opened the hives, they'd hum a low tune, believing the vibration mimicked the queen's song and kept the colony calm. The bees would buzz around their heads, golden in the sunlight, and the beekeeper would move slowly, careful not to disturb the delicate balance of the hive. Children were told that if they found a feather on the ground, they should place it under their pillow to dream of flight. But they had to check the feather for spots. Any blemish meant it belonged to a bird touched by evil and would bring nightmares. The perfect feathers, smooth and unmarked, would be tucked under the straw, and the child would close their eyes, imagining themselves soaring over the village, their dreams carried on the feather's soft edge. When a woman made cheese, she'd always add a pinch of her own hair to the curds. This was a way to bind her spirit to the cheese, ensuring it aged well and didn't spoil. The hair would disappear into the creamy mixture, and as she pressed the cheese into molds, she'd whisper her name so the spirit would know who to answer to. The cheese would ripen in a cool cellar, its rind growing hard, and when it was cut, the woman would smile, seeing her love and a bit of herself spread on the bread. Farmers sowing seeds would carry a small bag of soil from their own yard. They'd sprinkle the soil over the new field, saying it introduced the seeds to their new home. The familiar earth would mix with the foreign soil, and the farmer would imagine the seeds recognizing the scent, growing strong and tall. Sometimes they'd find a worm in the home soil and gently place it in the furrow, believing the worm's presence told the seeds that life was welcome here. In the village tannery, workers would never tan leather on a Monday. Mondays were dedicated to the moon, and tanning was seen as a sunny task that disrespected the moon's power. Instead, they'd spend the day soaking hide in water, watching the moon rise over the vats, and murmuring thanks to the moon for its light. The hides would float gently like dark clouds on the water, and the workers would leave them be, knowing the moon's magic was softening the leather better than any tool. Children caught stealing fruit were made to stand in the orchard and apologize to the tree. They'd have to hug the trunk and say, "I'm sorry, Mother Tree. I won't take your babies again." The tree's bark would feel rough against their skin, and some kids swore they could feel the tree trembling as if accepting the apology. Afterward, they'd often find a ripe fruit at their feet, maybe the tree's forgiveness or maybe just the wind, but they'd take it as a sign to be honest. When a villager built a new hearth, they'd place a smooth stone in the center before laying the bricks. This stone was called a hearth heart, and it was believed to keep the fire from going out on cold nights. The stone would heat and glow alongside the coals, and the family would touch it for warmth, feeling the stone's steady heat as a reminder that their home was protected. Over time, the stone would turn black and crack, but no one ever removed it. Its age was a badge of honor, a silent member of the family. In the herbalist's cottage, a string of garlic hung next to a bundle of sage. She said the garlic blocked the bad, while the sage let the good in, creating a balance in the air. When a customer came in coughing, she'd wave the sage over their head, saying, "Sage, sage, blow the sickness to the page," and then hang a garlic clove around their neck to stop the sickness in its track. The customer would leave smelling of earth and pungent garlic, but feeling lighter, as if the herbs had shouldered their illness. Children playing near a stream were told to never drink directly from it. Instead, they'd use a leaf as a cup, saying the stream spirits disliked lips touching their water. The leaf would curve gently, holding the cool water, and the child would sip carefully, making sure not to spill a drop. Sometimes they'd see a fish dart by, or a frog leap from a lily pad, and they'd think the spirits were watching, pleased that the child had shown respect. When a woman spun wool, she'd always start with a thread from her own garment. This starter thread connected her to the wool, ensuring the yarn would be strong and true. As she turned the spindle, she'd hum a song her mother taught her, the rhythm matching the spin. The wool would twist into yarn, soft and warm, and she'd imagine her mother's hands guiding hers, the starter thread, a bridge between the past and the present. Farmers checking their crops would walk backward through the field on the first day of summer. Walking backward was thought to trick the harvest spirits, making them think the farmer was leaving, so they'd hide extra wheat and barley for him to find. The farmer would shuffle carefully, eyes on the path behind, and when he turned around, he'd pretend to be surprised by the tall, golden stalks. Maybe it was a silly trick, but the fields always seemed a bit more bountiful after that. In the village pub, the bartender kept a bowl of nuts by the door. If a stranger entered, he'd offer them a nut, saying, "Crack a nut, crack a story," believing the act of sharing would loosen the stranger's tongue. The stranger would take a nut, crack it between their teeth, and start talking, maybe about a far, off land, or a funny mishap on the road. The regulars would listen, sipping their ale, and the bartender would smile, seeing the nuts as keys to open the door of friendship. Children were warned not to cross their legs while eating. Crossing legs was thought to tangle the food's path, causing indigestion and bad dreams. So they'd sit with feet flat on the floor, hands in their laps between bites, watching as their parents did the same. The table would be quiet, except for the clink of bowls and the rustle of cloth, and the children would feel safe, knowing their food was traveling smoothly through their bodies, unhindered by tangled legs. As the autumn leaves fell, villagers would gather them into piles, but never burn them on a windy day. Windy days were when the leaf spirits traveled, and burning the leaves would trap the spirits in the smoke, making them angry. Instead, they'd wait for a calm day, pile the leaves gently, and light the fire with a stick from a fruit tree. The smoke would rise straight up, carrying the spirits to their winter home, and the villagers would stand back, watching the leaves turn to ash, grateful for the spirits' summer work. When a traveler arrived at an inn, they'd place their boots outside the door before sleeping. Boots inside were thought to trap the road spirits, who needed to wander free at night. The traveler would leave the boots dusty and worn, maybe with a pebble or two inside, and in the morning they'd find the boots cleaned and the pebbles placed neatly beside them, perhaps the innkeeper's doing, or perhaps the road spirits saying thank you for the freedom. When a villager found a spider weaving a web across their doorway, they would never destroy it. Spiders were seen as weavers of fate, and their webs were thought to catch bad luck before it entered the home. Instead, they'd gently guide the web to the side with a stick, murmuring, "Spin on, spinner, catch the sorrows, let the joys pass through." The spider would scuttle to its new spot, legs moving quickly, and the villager would smile, knowing the tiny weaver was now a silent guardian. In the village bakery, the baker would always leave the first loaf of bread out for the hungry spirits. These spirits were believed to haunt the ovens, jealous of the warm, fresh bread. By offering the first loaf, the baker ensured the spirits wouldn't spoil the rest. The loaf would sit on a windowsill, growing stale, and sometimes the baker would find it slightly moved in the morning, proof, they said, that the spirits had taken their share. Children were taught to never pick a flower with a single petal. Such flowers were thought to be cursed by fairies who'd left them as traps for curious hands. If a child accidentally touched one, they were told to spit 3 times and run in a circle to break the fairy's spell. The flowers would stand alone in the meadow, their single petals trembling in the wind, and the children would point from a distance, whispering about the fairies who'd left them there. When a woman made a quilt, she'd always use an odd number of patches. Even numbers were associated with death, so odd numbers were thought to keep the quilt alive. As she sewed, she'd hum a tune for each patch, imagining the sound weaving into the fabric. The quilt would grow colorful and warm, lying on the bed like a patchwork of stories. And the woman would run her hand over the stitches, feeling the odd number of patches as a promise of life. Farmers plowing their fields would sometimes find a flint stone. They'd place it on the plowshare, believing the stone's spark would wake the earth and make the crops grow. The flint would clink against the metal as the plow moved, and the farmer would watch for tiny sparks flying into the soil like little seeds of life being planted alongside the grain. In the village school, the master kept a rosemary sprig on his desk. He'd rub it between his fingers when a student struggled, saying the scent cleared the fog in the mind. The students would watch as he did this, smelling the sharp, earthy aroma, and sometimes they'd feel their thoughts grow clearer, as if the rosemary had indeed chased away the confusion. Children playing near a graveyard were told to wear a sprig of thyme in their hair. Thyme was thought to mask their scent from the dead, who might mistake a living child for a lost soul. The thyme would tickle their ears, and they'd run carefully, not wanting to drop the sprig. Sometimes they'd feel a cool breeze on their necks and think the dead were passing by, none the wiser. When a traveler reached a crossroads, they would throw a piece of bread over their shoulder. This was to feed the crossroads spirits, who were known to mislead travelers. The bread would land in the dirt, and the traveler would choose a path without looking back, trusting that the spirits were now busy with their meal. In the herbalist's garden, a circle of stones surrounded a patch of mint. She said the stones held the mint's power, preventing it from spreading too far and losing its magic. As she picked the mint leaves, she'd step carefully around the stones, murmuring thanks to the earth for containing such a powerful herb. Children were warned not to whistle in the forest. Whistling was thought to call the wild things, who might follow the sound and lead them astray. Instead, they'd whisper to each other, or sing softly, keeping their voices low so as not to attract unwanted attention. When a villager mended a torn shirt, they would use thread that matched the original color. Mismatched thread was seen as an insult to the cloth, which might then shrink or fade. The villager would search their thread box carefully, holding each color up to the shirt until they found the perfect match. In the village smithy, the blacksmith kept a bowl of water near his anvil. He'd dip his hammer in the water after each strike, saying the steam cooled the hammer's anger and prevented it from shaping the metal wrong. The water would hiss and steam, and the blacksmith would watch the vapor rise, imagining the hammer's spirit calming down. Children were taught to never step on a worm. Worms were seen as Earth's messengers, and harming one would anger the earth itself. If a worm was on the path, they'd carefully pick it up and place it in the grass, saying, "Go on, little messenger, tell the earth we mean well." When a woman brewed ale, she would always use water from a certain well. The well was said to be blessed by a saint, and its water gave the ale a holy sweetness. She'd carry the water home in a wooden bucket, careful not to spill a drop, and as she brewed, she'd imagine the saint's blessing mixing with the barley. In the village cemetery, the gravedigger would place a small stone on each new grave. The stone was to keep the soul from floating away, anchoring it to the earth. He'd smooth the dirt over the stone, and sometimes he'd leave a sprig of lavender, hoping the scent would comfort the soul. Children were told that if they saw a shooting star, they should pinch their arm 3 times. Pinching was thought to wake the body, so the wish wouldn't get lost in the mind. They'd squeeze their skin gently, make a wish, and then rub the pinch, feeling a little thrill as they thought of the star carrying their wish away. When a villager planted a tree, they would bury a piece of bread with the roots. The bread was to feed the tree's spirit, helping it grow strong and tall. As they covered the roots, they'd whisper, "Bread for you, shade for me," and pat the dirt down gently. In the village pub, the bartender would never serve ale from a cracked jug. Cracked jugs were thought to let the ale's spirit escape, leaving it flat and tasteless. He'd inspect each jug carefully, running his finger over the surface, and only use the ones that were smooth and whole. Children were warned not to look directly at an eclipse. Looking at an eclipse was said to steal the eye's light, leaving them dim and useless. Instead, they'd watch the shadow on the ground or look through a piece of smoked glass, safe in the knowledge that their eyes were protected. When a woman knitted a scarf, she would always start with a slip knot. The slip knot was thought to open the door to good luck, allowing the scarf to be warm and long. As she knitted, she'd count her stitches, making sure they were even, and imagine the luck flowing through the yarn. In the herbalist's cottage, a jar of honey sat on the windowsill. She said the honey was gifted by the sun, and taking a spoonful each day would keep the sun's warmth in the body. The honey would glow golden in the sunlight, and she'd dip a wooden spoon in, watching the thick liquid drip slowly. Children were taught to never sleep with their heads facing north. North was the direction of death, so facing north was thought to invite the reaper. They'd arrange their pillows carefully, pointing south or east, and snuggle in, feeling safe in their chosen direction. When a villager built a fence, they would place a brick at each corner. The bricks were to anchor the fence to the earth, preventing it from falling over in a storm. They'd lay the bricks carefully, making sure they were level, and pat the dirt around them, satisfied that the fence was now secure. In the village school, the master would ring a bell at the start of each lesson. The bell was thought to wake the students' minds, preparing them to learn. The bell's tone was clear and bright, and the students would sit up straight, ready to absorb the day's knowledge. Children were told that if they found a horseshoe, they should hang it above their door. Horseshoes were seen as lucky, and hanging them with the ends up was thought to catch the luck and keep it from spilling. They'd nail the horseshoe carefully, stepping back to admire it and feel a sense of pride in their newfound luck. When a woman made a pie, she would always cut the crust in a spiral. The spiral was thought to guide the pie's flavor, making it sweet and delicious. As she cut the crust, she'd hum a little tune and place the spiral on top, watching it bake to a golden brown. In the village smithy, the blacksmith would heat his metal until it glowed red. Red, hot metal was thought to burn away any evil, leaving it pure and strong. He'd watch the metal carefully, waiting for the perfect shade of red, and then strike it with his hammer, shaping it into something useful. Children were warned not to eat an apple at night. Apples eaten at night were said to turn to poison in the stomach, causing bad dreams and stomach aches. Instead, they'd eat their apples during the day, enjoying the sweet crunch in the sunlight. When a villager traveled far from home, they would take a handful of dirt from their yard. The dirt was to remind them of home and keep them safe on their journey. They'd carry the dirt in a pouch, touching it occasionally, and feel a sense of comfort knowing a piece of home was with them. In the herbalist's garden, a bench sat under a willow tree. She said the willow's branches swept away bad thoughts, so she'd sit there when she needed to think. The branches would rustle in the wind, and she'd close her eyes, feeling the bad thoughts being carried away. Children were taught to never interrupt a bird's song. Interrupting a bird's song was thought to anger the bird spirits, who might then curse the child. Instead, they'd listen quietly, enjoying the melody, and maybe even sing along softly if the bird seemed to approve. When a woman sewed a button, she would always use 4 holes. 4 holes were thought to make the button secure, preventing it from falling off. She'd thread the needle carefully, pushing it through each hole, and tie a strong knot, satisfied that the button was now firmly attached. In the village pub, the bartender would pour ale with a steady hand. A steady pour was thought to keep the ale's spirit happy, resulting in a smooth, flavorful drink. He'd watch the ale fill the mug, forming a foamy head, and hand it to the customer with a smile. Children were told that if they saw a butterfly, they should make a wish. Butterflies were seen as messengers of the fairies, and making a wish when one was near was thought to ensure it would come true. They'd close their eyes, make their wish, and open them to see the butterfly flutter away, hopefully carrying their wish to the fairies. When a villager planted a garden, they would plant flowers and vegetables together. Flowers were thought to charm the vegetables, making them grow big and healthy. They'd arrange the plants carefully, mixing colors and shapes, and watch as the garden grew into a beautiful, bountiful space. In the herbalist's cottage, a book of remedies sat on a shelf. She'd never let the book lie open face down, as that was thought to trap the remedy's spirits, making them useless. Instead, she'd place a ribbon between the pages, marking her spot, and close it gently, respecting the knowledge within. Children were warned not to play near a bridge at night. Bridges at night were said to be gates to the other world, and playing near them might attract unwanted spirits. Instead, they'd stay home, by the fire, listening to stories and feeling safe. When a woman baked bread, she would always let the dough rise in a warm place. A warm place was thought to encourage the bread spirit, making it light and fluffy. She'd cover the dough with a cloth, placing it near the fire, and watch as it grew, satisfied that the bread was happy. In the village smithy, the blacksmith would say a prayer before starting a new project. The prayer was to ask for guidance, ensuring that the project would be well made and useful. He'd bow his head, murmur a few words, and then pick up his tools, ready to begin. Children were taught to never waste food. Wasting food was thought to anger the harvest spirits, who had worked hard to provide it. Instead, they'd eat every bite or give any leftovers to the animals, showing respect for the food and the spirits. When a villager traveled by boat, they would bring a piece of bread with them. The bread was to feed the sea spirits, keeping them calm and preventing storms. They'd place the bread on the chuan-tu, watching as the waves crashed around them and feel a sense of security knowing the spirits were fed. In the herbalist's garden, a stream ran through the middle. She'd never step in the stream as it was thought to disturb the water spirits, who provided the garden with life. Instead, she'd walk around it, admiring the clear water, and thank the spirits for their gift. Children were told that if they had a sore throat, they should suck on a honeycomb. Honeycomb was seen as nature's medicine, and sucking on it was thought to soothe the throat spirits, easing the pain. They'd hold the honeycomb in their mouths, enjoying the sweet taste and feel their throats grow better. When a woman knitted a sweater, she would always start with the cuffs. Starting with the cuffs was thought to frame the sweater properly, ensuring a good fit. She'd knit the cuffs tightly, then move up to the sleeves and body, creating a warm, comfortable sweater. In the village pub, the bartender would clean the mugs with sand. Sand was thought to scrub away any bad luck, leaving the mugs clean and ready for use. He'd swirl the sand around inside each mug, rinse it out, and dry it carefully, satisfied that the mugs were now pure. Children were warned not to stare at the sun. Staring at the sun was said to blind the soul, leaving a person empty and lost. Instead, they'd look at the sun's reflection or enjoy its warmth, respecting its power from a distance. When a villager built a house, they would place a coin under the threshold. The coin was to bring good fortune, ensuring that the house would be a happy, prosperous home. They'd bury the coin carefully, covering it with dirt and stones, and feel confident that the house was now blessed. In the herbalist's cottage, a candle burned day and night. She said the candle was a light for the spirits, guiding them to her and her remedies. The candle would flicker gently, casting shadows on the walls, and she'd work by its light, feeling the spirit's presence. Children were taught to never lie. Lying was thought to taint the tongue, making it hard to speak the truth in the future. Instead, they'd tell the truth, even if it was hard, and feel proud of their honesty. When a woman made butter, she would always churn it in a wooden bucket. Wooden buckets were thought to keep the butter's spirit pure, preventing it from turning rancid. She'd churn the cream slowly, watching as it thickened, and form the butter into pats, satisfied with her work. In the village smithy, the blacksmith would cool his metal in a bucket of water. The water was thought to harden the metal's spirit, making it strong and durable. He'd plunge the hot metal into the water, listening to the hiss, and watch as the steam rose, knowing the metal was now ready. Children were told that if they saw a rainbow, they should follow it. Following a rainbow was thought to lead to a pot of gold, though no one had ever found one. Still, they'd run towards the rainbow, laughing, enjoying the chase and the hope. When a villager planted a tree, they would water it with milk. Milk was seen as nourishment for the tree's spirit, helping it grow tall and strong. They'd pour the milk around the roots, imagining the tree drinking it up, and watch as it grew, thriving in its new home. In the herbalist's garden, a patch of sunflowers grew tall. She'd never cut the sunflowers, as they were thought to hold the sun's power, and cutting them would release it too soon. Instead, she'd let them grow until they drooped, then collect the seeds, grateful for the sun's gift. And so the days went on, each filled with small rituals and quiet beliefs, a tapestry of superstitions that wove through daily life. The villagers moved through their world with a gentle respect for the unseen, their actions guided by generations of whispers, their lives a slow dance with the mysteries of the medieval world. As the years passed, these beliefs grew as familiar as the rising sun, a comforting constant in a world that often felt wild and unknowable. When a villager stumbled upon a snail in their garden, they would carefully place it on a leaf and carry it to the edge of the property. Snails were seen as Earth's scribes, their trails leaving messages from the spirits, but having them in the garden was thought to slow the growth of plants. The villager would murmur, "Write your tales elsewhere, little scribe," and watch as the snail inched away, its silvery trail glistening in the dew like a forgotten note. In the weaver's cottage, a wooden shuttle hung from the ceiling when not in use. She believed the shuttle held the memory of threads, so she'd never let it touch the ground, lest the memories be lost in the dirt. When starting a new weave, she'd hold the shuttle to her forehead, whispering, "Show me the pattern," before passing it through the warp. The shuttle would fly back and forth, its polished wood catching the light, and the weaver would swear she could hear faint echoes of past threads humming in the loom. Children were forbidden from counting the stars in the sky after midnight. Stars were said to be the eyes of angels, and counting them late at night might distract the angels from watching over the sleeping village. Instead, they'd lie in their beds, gazing through small window panes, and pick a single star to wish on, imagining the angel's eye blinking in response. When a woman brewed tea, she'd always add an odd number of leaves to the pot. Even numbers were associated with misfortune, so an odd count was thought to balance the tea's spirit. She'd pluck the leaves carefully, counting under her breath, and pour the water slowly, watching as the leaves unfurled like tiny prayers in the steam. The tea would steep gently, its aroma filling the room, and she'd sip it with a spoon made of birch, believing birchwood carried the taste without taint. Farmers checking their beehives would carry a sprig of basil. Basil was thought to calm the bees' temper, especially when the hive was being disturbed. They'd tuck the sprig behind their ear, its sharp scent mixing with the honeyed air, and open the hive slowly, speaking soft words. "Easy, sisters, we mean you no harm." The bees would buzz around them, less aggressive, and the farmer would take the basil as a sign of peace between human and hive. In the village school, the master kept a bowl of rose petals on his desk. If a student read well, he'd give them a petal to hold, claiming rose petals trap the sound of good words, helping the student remember the lesson. The petal would feel soft and cool in the child's palm, its scent faint but lingering, and they'd tuck it into a pouch, convinced the words they'd read were now kept safe in the flower's memory. Children playing near a river were told to throw a pebble into the water before crossing a ford. The pebble was a payment to the river spirit, ensuring safe passage. They'd search for a smooth stone, whisper, "For your trouble, river," and drop it in. The splash would ripple out, and the child would step into the water, feeling the current swirl around their ankles, maybe the spirit's way of saying thank you. When a traveler packed their bag, they'd place a piece of charcoal at the bottom. Charcoal was believed to absorb bad luck, keeping the journey free of mishaps. The traveler would wrap the charcoal in a cloth, tucking it next to their belongings, and touch it before leaving. Burn away what would hinder me. Sometimes, after a long trip, they'd find the charcoal turned to dust, which they'd scatter on the road as a final offering. In the herbalist's cottage, a string of dried peppers hung above the door. She said peppers frightened away illness spirits, their bright color and sharp scent acting as a warning. When a sick visitor entered, she'd point to the peppers. "See how they stand guard? They'll keep the bad spirits from following you in." The visitor would look up at the peppers, feeling a bit safer under their watch. Children were taught to never step on a crack in the road. Cracks were seen as doors to the underworld, and stepping on one might let a demon through. They'd hop from stone to stone, laughing as they avoided the gaps, their parents smiling at the sight, happy the children remembered to respect the earth's hidden doors. When a woman knitted a cap, she'd always make the brim slightly too long. A longer brim was thought to shield the wearer's thoughts, keeping them safe from prying spirits. She'd fold the brim up, securing it with a stitch, and imagine the extra fabric forming a soft barrier against unseen eyes. In the village smithy, the blacksmith kept a horseshoe above his forge, but he'd turn it once a month. Turning the horseshoe was believed to refresh its luck, ensuring it continued to catch good fortune. He'd climb a ladder, grasp the horseshoe, and rotate it gently, muttering, "Turn with the moon, hold the luck tight." The horseshoe would clink against the wall, its iron surface warm from the forge's heat. Children were warned not to eat berries after sunset. Berries picked in the dark were said to carry the night's sadness, making the eater melancholy. Instead, they'd gather berries in the daylight, filling baskets with red and blue fruits, and eat them fresh, savoring the sun's warmth in each bite. When a villager built a birdhouse, they'd carve a small cross into the side. The cross was to bless the birds, keeping them safe from predators. They'd use a knife to make the mark, shallow but clear, and hang the birdhouse in a tree, hoping the cross would remind the birds that this was a holy place. In the herbalist's garden, a patch of mint grew around a stone. She'd never let the mint grow over the stone, as it was thought to bury the stone's wisdom. Instead, she'd trim the mint back, exposing the stone, and sit beside it, running her hand over its surface, convinced the stone held secrets of the earth, revealed only to those who kept it visible. Children were told that if they found a feather with both black and white, they should place it on a windowsill. Such feathers were seen as messages from both worlds, and leaving them on the windowsill allowed the message to be received without inviting trouble. The feather would flutter in the breeze, its two colors blending in the light, and the child would check on it daily, wondering what the message might be. When a woman made a stew, she'd always stir it clockwise. Stirring counterclockwise was thought to tangle the flavors, making the stew taste sour. She'd use a wooden spoon, moving it in a slow circle, and imagine the flavors dancing together in the pot, growing richer with each turn. In the village pub, the bartender would wipe the tables with a cloth dipped in rosemary water. Rosemary was believed to cleanse the wood, removing any bad luck left by previous patrons. He'd wipe each table carefully, the rosemary scent mixing with the smell of ale, and customers would sit down, feeling the table was fresh and welcoming. Children were taught to never wear mismatched socks. Mismatched socks were seen as an invitation to chaos, which might lead to all sorts of mishaps. They'd search their drawers for pairs, holding them up to the light, and pull them on, satisfied that their feet were now in harmony. When a villager planted a vine, they'd bury a piece of cheese with the roots. Cheese was thought to feed the vine's spirit, helping it grow strong and bear sweet fruit. They'd dig a small hole, place the cheese beside the roots, and cover it gently, imagining the vine absorbing the cheese's richness. In the herbalist's cottage, a jar of lavender oil sat on a shelf. She'd never use the oil on a cloudy day, as clouds were thought to dull the oil's magic. Instead, she'd wait for sunshine, open the jar, and breathe in the scent, saying, "Sunlight wakes the lavender's power." And so the rhythms of life continued, each action a thread in the tapestry of belief. The villagers moved through their days with a quiet reverence, their superstitions not fears, but gentle guides like the soft glow of a lantern on a foggy night. As the seasons turned and generations passed, these small rituals remained, a constant reminder that the world was full of mysteries, some to be feared, but most to be honored, like the slow, steady beat of a heart in the quiet of the medieval night. When a villager chanced upon a frog in their courtyard, they would never show it away. Frogs were seen as rain messengers, their presence a sign that the sky would soon weep. Instead, they'd leave a shallow dish of milk nearby, murmuring, "Drink, little messenger, and carry word we thirst for rain." The frog would sit perfectly still, its eyes glistening in the sun, and the villager would watch for days, convinced the frog's patience would summon the clouds. In the weaver's loft, a bundle of blue thread was always kept separate from the rest. Blue was believed to hold the sky's memory, and mixing it with other colors might tarnish the heaven's hue. When weaving a piece for a newborn, she'd use the blue thread to stitch a tiny cloud at the hem, whispering, "May this child always have sky above them." The thread would catch the light like a fragment of sky, soft and unblemished. Children were forbidden from counting the rings on a tree stump. Tree rings were said to be the tree's life story, and counting them too loudly might wake the tree's spirit, causing it to moan in the night. Instead, they'd trace the rings with a finger, silent as snow, imagining the tree's years standing tall in the forest. When a woman baked a cake for a celebration, she'd always place a bay leaf under the batter. Bay leaves were thought to seal in joy, preventing the happiness of the occasion from fading. As the cake baked, the leaf would infuse the air with a warm, spicy scent, and she'd remove it before serving, showing the guests the intact leaf as a sign that the joy was still whole. Farmers harvesting wheat would leave the last sheaf standing in the field. This mother sheaf was offered to the harvest spirits, who were believed to live in the tallest stalks. They'd tie the sheaf with a red ribbon saying, "Take this, mothers, and bless next year's crop." The wind would rustle the lone sheaf, its golden blades waving like a flag, and the farmers would smile, knowing the spirits had received their gift. In the village school, the master kept a bowl of walnuts on his desk. If a student answered a question correctly, he'd give them a walnut, saying, "Crack this for wisdom. It's stored in the nut's heart." The student would hold the walnut, its rough shell pressing into their palm, and crack it open later, finding the tiny, folded kernel inside. Surely the shape of wisdom itself. Children playing near a forest's edge were told to leave a crumb of bread on a mossy stone. The bread was a peace offering to the forest folk, who might otherwise lead them astray. They'd place the crumb carefully, stepping back slowly, and sometimes return to find it gone, replaced by a single perfect pine cone, as if the forest had thanked them in kind. When a traveler crossed a mountain pass, they would stack 3 stones along the path. Stacking stones was thought to help the wind find its way, preventing it from growing angry and causing storms. The traveler would choose smooth stones, balancing them carefully, and continue on, looking back to see the small cairn standing tall against the sky. In the herbalist's cottage, a bundle of sage hung from the rafters, but she'd never let it touch the ground. Sage was believed to carry the sun's purifying fire, and dropping it would douse the flame. When smudging a room, she'd hold the bundle with both hands, waving it gently, and the smoke would rise in lazy curls like sunlight made visible. Children were taught to never blow on a dandelion clock. Blowing on the fluff was said to scatter one's wishes too far, making them impossible to catch. Instead, they'd pluck the dandelion, close their eyes, and make a wish, then tuck the fluff into a pocket, trusting the wish would stay close until it was ready to bloom. When a woman sewed a baby's blanket, she'd use only even stitches. Even stitches were thought to create a soft cradle for the baby's dreams, while uneven ones might snag the dreams and tear them. She'd count each stitch under her breath, her needle moving in a steady rhythm, and the blanket would grow smooth and soft, a nest of evenness. In the village smithy, the blacksmith kept a bowl of watered-down ale near his anvil. He'd dip his fingers in the ale before shaping metal, saying it quenched the metal's thirst, making it more pliable. The ale would steam slightly as it hit the hot metal, and he'd watch the vapor rise, imagining the metal sighing in relief. Children were warned not to pick flowers from a thorn bush. Flowers with thorns were said to guard a fairy's bed, and picking them might wake the fairy, who'd cast a spell. Instead, they'd admire the flowers from a distance, noting how the thorns glistened like tiny swords protecting the petals. When a villager planted a herb garden, they'd place a broken pottery shard at its center. The shard was thought to hold the garden's memory, helping the herbs remember how to grow. They'd bury the shard halfway, its rough edge pointing up, and the herbs would sprout around it, their roots winding through the cracks. In the herbalist's garden, a stone bench sat beside a thyme patch. She'd sit there on quiet afternoons, running her fingers through the thyme, saying the herb's scent wove thoughts together, making it easier to think clearly. The thyme would release a sharp aroma, and she'd close her eyes, feeling her thoughts settle like leaves on a still pond. Children were told that if they found a smooth stone in the road, they should carry it in their pocket for a day. Smooth stones were seen as gifts from the earth, and carrying them would bring the earth's calmness to the bearer. They'd feel the stone's coolness through their clothes, rubbing it with a thumb, and at day's end toss it back onto the road, letting the earth know they'd accepted the gift. When a woman made a scarf, she'd always finish with a tassel. The tassel was thought to catch the wind's whispers, allowing the wearer to hear good news carried on the breeze. She'd tie the tassel carefully, its threads swaying gently, and imagine the wind speaking softly into the phrase. In the village pub, the bartender would fill each mug to the brim but never let it overflow. Overflowing ale was seen as wasting the brew's spirit, which had worked hard to become drinkable. He'd pour with a steady hand, stopping just before the ale crested, and the customer would raise the mug, saluting the spirit's effort. Children were taught to never walk backward in a cemetery. Walking backward was thought to confuse the dead, who might follow the wrong way out of the graveyard. Instead, they'd walk forward slowly, eyes downcast, and only look back once they had reached the gate. When a villager planted an apple tree, they'd bury an apple core with the roots. The core was thought to pass on the apple's memory, ensuring the new tree bore sweet fruit. They'd dig a small hole, place the core gently, and cover it with soil, whispering, "Grow true, little tree, from old to new." In the herbalist's cottage, a candle burned in a window, but she'd never let it burn all the way down. Letting a candle burn out completely was thought to extinguish a spirit's light, so she'd snuff it out while a stub remained, saving the wax for future candles. And so the days rolled on, each moment a bead on the string of tradition. The villagers lived not in fear, but in a gentle accord with the unseen, their superstitions as natural as the changing of the seasons. As the years piled up like autumn leaves, these quiet beliefs became the very soil in which their lives took root. A reminder that even in the darkest nights there were unseen hands to hold, and even in the simplest acts there was magic waiting to be honored, soft as a moth's wing, steady as the tides, and as endless as the medieval sky. When a villager found a ladybug crawling on their sleeve, they would never brush it away. Ladybugs were seen as heaven's messengers, their red shells carrying prayers to the gods. Instead, they'd hold out their hand, murmuring, "Fly high, little messenger, tell the sky we're well." The ladybug would crawl onto their palm, its tiny feet tickling the skin, before unfolding its wings and disappearing into the blue, leaving the villager with a quiet hope that their words had been heard. In the weaver's cottage, a spindle of golden thread was kept in a locked box. Golden thread was believed to hold the sun's essence, and using it carelessly might anger the sun god. When weaving a tapestry for a wedding, she'd unlock the box with a silver key, taking out the thread like a sliver of sunlight. The thread would glow in her hands, and she'd weave it into the tapestry as a ribbon of hope, believing it would keep the couple's love as bright as noon. Children were forbidden from stepping on a butterfly's shadow. A butterfly's shadow was said to be its soul's reflection, and stepping on it might injure the soul. They'd watch the butterflies flutter by, their shadows dancing on the grass, and jump over them carefully, laughing as they tried to catch the fleeting shapes without harm. When a woman made a potion for a sick child, she'd always brew it in a clay pot. Clay was thought to absorb the earth's healing, and metal pots might taint the medicine with coldness. She'd heat the pot over a low fire, stirring with a wooden spoon, and whisper the child's name into the steam, convinced the earth and the name together would make the potion strong. Farmers plowing near an ancient stone circle would leave a sheaf of wheat at its center. The stones were believed to be sleeping giants, and offering wheat would keep them from waking. They'd place the sheaf gently, bowing their heads, and the wind would rustle the wheat, sounding like a giant's soft snore, reassuring them the giants remained at peace. In the village school, the master kept a quill made from a swan's feather. He'd only use it to write blessings, saying swan feathers carried the grace of water. When signing a document that wished someone well, he'd dip the quill in ink, its white feather trembling slightly, and write in flowing letters, believing the swan's grace would seep into the words. Children playing by a well were told to drop a hair into the water before drinking. A hair was thought to bind the drinker to the well's spirit, ensuring the water would always be safe. They'd pluck a hair from their head, drop it in, and watch it float before taking a sip, feeling the cool water connect them to the well's deep, ancient life. When a traveler crossed a desert, they would carry a pouch of salt. Salt was believed to ward off sand spirits, who like to blow storms and confuse paths. The traveler would sprinkle a pinch of salt over their shoulder each morning, saying, "For the spirits of the sand, keep your storms at hand." The salt would disappear into the wind, and the traveler would walk on, their path clear under the hot sun. In the herbalist's cottage, a dried lily hung above her work table. She said lilies held the moon's purity, and their presence kept her remedies from being tainted by darkness. When grinding herbs, she'd glance up at the lily, its pale petals now brown and brittle, and feel the moon's quiet light guiding her hands. Children were taught to never whistle inside a barn. Whistling in a barn was thought to wake the grain spirits, who needed to sleep to keep the harvests bountiful. Instead, they'd hum softly, their voices blending with the rustle of hay, and the animals would stir gently, maybe the spirits turning over in their sleep. When a woman knitted a shawl, she'd always start from the center and work outward. Starting at the center was thought to draw luck from the heart, spreading it to the edges. She'd cast on a single stitch, then increase slowly, the shawl growing like a ripple on a pond, and imagine luck radiating from the center to warm the wearer. In the village smithy, the blacksmith kept a horseshoe under his anvil. He'd tap the horseshoe with his hammer before starting a new job, saying it woke the iron's memory, helping it remember how to be strong. The horseshoe would ring softly, and he'd begin to work, metal glowing as if it truly recalled its past lives. Children were warned not to eat an egg that had a double yolk. Double yolk eggs were said to hold a witch's curse, and eating them might turn a child into a goat. They'd hold the eggs up to the light, checking for single yolks, and toss any doubles into the compost, watching as the chickens pecked at them, seemingly unafraid of the curse. When a villager planted a row of beans, they'd place a stone between each plant. Stones were thought to hold the soil's warmth, helping the beans grow straight. They'd choose flat stones, nestling them in the dirt, and the beans would climb over them, their vines wrapping around the stones like arms around a friend. In the herbalist's garden, a small pond was home to a single goldfish. She believed the goldfish was a fragment of the sun, and its swimming kept the garden's spirits happy. She'd sit by the pond, watching the fish glide through the water, its scales flashing like sunlight on a stream, and feel the garden's magic grow stronger. Children were told that if they saw a shooting star, they should tie a knot in their sleeve. Tying a knot was thought to trap the star's luck, keeping it from fading. They'd fumble with their sleeve, making a small knot, and then undo it in the morning, believing the luck had slipped from the knot into their day. When a woman made a pie, she'd always cut a star shape in the crust. A star was thought to guide the pie's flavor, making it delicious. She'd use a small knife, pressing out the star, and the steam would rise through the holes, forming tiny clouds that smelled of apples and cinnamon. In the village pub, the bartender would rinse each mug with cold water before filling it. Rinsing with cold water was believed to wake the mug's spirit, making it ready to hold ale. He'd swirl the water around, pour it out, and then fill the mug, watching as the ale foamed up, the mug's spirit clearly pleased. Children were taught to never wear a hat indoors. Hats were seen as protection from the sky, and wearing them inside might offend the hearth spirit. They'd place their hats by the door, hanging them on a peg, and the hearth would crackle softly, maybe the spirit nodding in approval. When a villager built a fence, they'd place a piece of bread on top of each post. Bread was thought to feed the fence's spirit, keeping it standing strong. They'd balance the bread carefully, and the birds would come to eat it, their chirps sounding like thanks for the meal. And maybe the fence's spirit, too, happy to have company. In the herbalist's cottage, a book of spells was wrapped in a cloth. She'd never read the spells at night, as night was thought to weaken the spell's light. Instead, she'd wait for sunrise, unwrap the book, and read by the window, believing the sun's rays would give the spells strength. And so the world turned, wrapped in a web of quiet beliefs. The villagers moved through their days like leaves on a stream, carried by traditions as old as the hills. Each superstition was a thread in fabric of their lives, not burden, but a comfort, like a familiar song that played in the background of every moment. As the years went by, these beliefs grew as natural as breathing, a gentle way to honor the mysteries of the world and find peace in the knowledge that even the smallest act held the weight of generations. The medieval night would fall, soft and dark, but the villagers slept soundly, wrapped in the warmth of customs, knowing that in the morning the sun would rise, and with it another day of living in harmony with the seen and the unseen, the known and the magical, in a world where every pebble, every breeze, every thread held a story waiting to be whispered.